Janice's journey did not end in a fairy tale. Healing was slow, fragile, and ongoing. Some scars still ached in the quiet hours of the night, but each sunrise by the lake reminded her of one truth: life, no matter how fractured, could be reclaimed. Her pain had sparked change. Naomi now stood guard for others as a nurse. Evan rebuilt trust through honesty, and the community began listening more carefully to voices too often dismissed. Janice herself became a protector, speaking out so no one else would feel erased. They tried to erase me, she reflected, but I chose to write myself back into the world. Healing is not about forgetting, it's about living, scars and all. And maybe that's the question for us all. When faced with manipulation or silence, would you have the courage to protect the dignity of someone you love? Backhand index pointing right. If Janice's story touched you, share it so others may learn to recognize the signs. Don't forget to subscribe for more true life stories of resilience and healing. They say danger has a sound, sirens, shouts, breaking glass. For me, danger arrived quietly, slipped into my palm on the night of my 59th birthday, disguised as a folded napkin in a crowded Italian restaurant. My name is Janice Hartwell. I teach literature at the community college in Raleigh, North Carolina. I live alone in a modest house filled with books and potted plants. And until that night, the most excitement in my week was deciding whether to splurge on fresh flowers at the farmer's market. I am not dramatic by nature. I don't go looking for trouble. But on the evening of March 12th, trouble came for me. La Bellora was full, the air heavy with garlic, roasted peppers, and the faint sweetness of tiramisu carried from the kitchen. It was a Friday night, and every table buzzed with conversation and laughter. The brick walls glowed beneath strings of warm amber lights, and a pair of musicians played accordion and violin near the back, weaving their notes into the chatter. Evan, my son, had insisted on taking me out. "You deserve more than frozen pizza and a cupcake from Harris Teeter," he'd said when he booked the reservation. He was right. He guided me to our booth, his hand warm against my shoulder. "Happy birthday, Mom." He has always been like that, attentive, affectionate, wearing his heart on his sleeve. At 32, Evan still had the same boyish grin he'd had at 7, the one that could soften me even on the worst days. Broad-shouldered, with his father's steady frame and my brown eyes, he looked every bit the man I hoped he'd become. Waiting for us was his wife, Marissa. She stood when she saw me, her black dress gleaming under the lights, her hair sleek, not a strand out of place. She hugged me briefly, her perfume sharp, almost floral enough to sting. "You look beautiful, Selena," she said. The words were right, but her smile was the kind that landed just short of genuine. The kind you learn to perfect in photographs. "Thank you, Marissa," I replied, forcing warmth into my voice. I had always hoped we would grow close, but there was something about her, something too polished, too controlled, that never quite let me relax. The waiter brought bread, olive oil, and menus. I ordered my favorite eggplant parmesan. Evan picked gnocchi, and Marissa predictably ordered a Caesar salad. "I'm being good tonight," she explained, as if eating a real meal was a confession. Then came the wine. Evan stood proudly as the server uncorked the bottle of Chianti he'd chosen. He poured 3 glasses, his hand steady despite the shine in his eyes. "To Mom," he said, raising his glass, his voice cracked slightly. "For everything she's done, for showing me what strength looks like, for surviving Dad's death and still giving me a life full of love." The words pierced me, my throat tightened, tears pressing at the corners of my eyes. I lifted my glass, smiling at my son with all the love I carried. And then in that tender, fragile moment, it happened. A young server approached. She couldn't have been older than 20. Her chestnut hair was tied back in a messy bun, and her uniform hung loose on her thin frame. She leaned toward me as if adjusting the napkin by my plate. In one quick, practiced motion, she slid a folded piece of paper beneath my hand. She didn't speak, she didn't smile. She only met my eyes for a single heartbeat, wide, urgent, filled with something I recognized instantly as fear, before she turned and disappeared into the dining room. My fingers closed over the paper. My heart pounded in my chest as I unfolded it under the table, hidden in my lap. The words were jagged, written in haste. Don't drink that, your life is in danger. My entire body froze. The sounds of the restaurant dulled to a distant hum, as if someone had wrapped the world in cotton. The laughter, the clatter of dishes, even Evan's voice faded until there was only me, my pounding heart, and the glass of red wine before me. I stared at it. Just moments ago, it had been a symbol of celebration, of love. Now it shimmered under the candlelight like something sinister. I forced myself to keep my face neutral. I couldn't let Evan see the fear in my eyes. He was laughing, telling Marissa something about his new project at work. Neither of them had noticed the server's visit. My gaze shifted. Evan's glass sat untouched. Marissa had already lifted hers, swirling it gently as if she were waiting for me. Her eyes flicked toward me, then toward my glass. A flicker of tension moved across her face, so quick I might have imagined it. Her hand trembled slightly. Am I imagining this? The napkin in my lap crumpled as I gripped it tighter. I couldn't drink. I couldn't risk it. But refusing outright would raise questions I wasn't ready to answer. So I did the only thing I could. When Evan turned to wave down the waiter for more bread, I seized the moment. In one smooth, careful movement, I slid my glass closer to Marissa and nudged hers toward me. The switch was quick, invisible. No one noticed. I lifted the glass that had once been hers and forced a steady smile. To family, I said, my voice thin but even. Our glasses touched with a soft clink. I raised mine to my lips, letting the wine graze my tongue. My eyes stayed fixed on Marissa. At first, nothing. She dabbed her mouth with her napkin, nodded at Evan's story, the picture of composure. For a heartbeat, I thought maybe the note had been a cruel prank or that I'd lost my mind. Then it happened. Marissa's smile faltered. Her fingers twitched against the stem of her glass. She set it down too quickly, nearly spilling it. Her eyes blinked too fast, unfocused. I don't feel right, she whispered, her voice strained, almost breaking. Color drained from her face, leaving her pale beneath the warm lights. Her hand trembled as she pressed it against her stomach. My blood turned to ice. Had I just saved myself from whatever was in that glass, or had I doomed my daughter-in-law by giving it to her? It happened in the thin space between laughter and silence, the 5 minutes after the toast when the room still glowed and the future still behaved. Marissa's hand missed the stem of her glass. The wine shivered and steadied. She didn't. Her shoulders tightened as if an invisible cord pulled them to her ears. Then she folded, slow and strange, one palm flying to her stomach, the other flattening on the linen like she needed the table to remember gravity for her. Marissa, Evan was half a second behind the moment, voice pitched too high, already standing, already reaching. Her breath turned to pieces. She tried to gather it and couldn't. A sound left her throat that didn't belong in a restaurant, raw and small and animal. Her chair skidded. The red spill on the table ran in a narrow river toward the breadbasket. All the conversation around us faltered. Forks hovered, sentences broke at the waist. In a crowded room, panic learns choreography fast. I stood because my body remembered how. My mind stayed seated, locked on one sentence burning in the fist inside my purse. Don't drink that, your life is in danger. I had switched the glasses. Marissa's eyes were glossy and unfocused, like she was looking at a window from the wrong side. I can't, she tried again, throat working. It's tight. Her fingers dug into the tablecloth, sweat peppered her hairline. The color had drained from her face in one unbroken motion. Call 911, Evan shouted to no one and everyone. The manager appeared the way managers do, urgent and apologetic. A server brought water with the speed of someone who knows water is not a cure but a reflex. The young waitress, the one with the chestnut hair and the note, materialized at the edge of the chaos, eyes stark, hands already clearing a path between tables. Breathe, babe, breathe for me, Evan said, the words shaking. He pressed his palm to Marissa's back, then hesitated, afraid that touch might make a thing worse he couldn't see. My hands did practical things. I slid purses and phones away from the spreading wine, pushed chairs back with my knees, found a cool cloth when someone thrust it at me. Under those simple motions, guilt rose like a tide I could not command. If the warning had been true and everything in Marissa's body declared it was, then the glass in front of her had been meant for me. And I, terrified and alive, had made sure it wasn't. I don't know when the paramedics arrived. I know only how the room learned to part for them. One knelt so his eyes were level with Marissa's. "I'm Nate, you're safe, tell me where it hurts." She tried to answer, the words came in shards. Chest, dizzy, can't breathe. Cuffs, sensors, a pulse ox clipped to her finger, an oxygen mask eased over lipstick that had smeared at the edges. The second medic, Hannah, her badge said, asked questions that made the world specific again. Any allergies, new meds, what did she eat, any history? Salad, Evan said, just salad. She runs 5 miles 3 times a week. She doesn't have this isn't. He stopped, breath hitching. Has she had anything to drink? Hannah asked. Wine, I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to a woman who grades papers and keeps basil in a sunny kitchen. Ordinary, as if ordinary could be armor. How much? Nate looked at the glasses. 2 were almost full, one had left a bruise of red on white cloth. Just a sip, I lied, because the truth was a map to a place none of us knew how to stand. They lifted Marissa onto the stretcher with movements that were both gentle and practiced. The manager kept saying, "I'm so sorry," to no one in particular. The young waitress met my eyes for half a breath, her jaw set as if to keep everything she knew from spilling out. I wanted to grab her hand, ask her why, ask her how, but the stretcher moved and Evan moved with it, and a siren waited somewhere to translate fear into sound. "Come on, Mom," he said, and in an instant he was 8 years old, calling me from the end of our driveway because he'd fallen. Gravel in both palms and confusion in his eyes at the sight of blood. I followed. The ambulance was a box of bright noises. Red and blue ricocheted inside it. The oxygen hissed. Hannah's voice was calm the way lullabies pretend the world is safe. Evan held Marissa's hand, thumb tracing circles on her skin as if he could invent a way back to before. I sat with my purse zipped around a secret and counted the beats of my own heart like they were something I could donate. I tried to pray and ended up listing verbs: save, protect, reveal, forgive. The fourth one frightened me most. At Wake Med, doors opened because we needed them to. Forms appeared and were signed without reading. A nurse with kind eyes asked for a birth date. The numbers fell out of Evan's mouth as if he had been born memorizing them. The stretcher disappeared behind a set of doors that understood privacy and the real work of triage. They left us with a waiting room that smelled like antiseptic and coffee that had died twice. A television narrated a weather map. Someone cried 2 seats away quietly like a person who has been practicing. Evan sat with his elbows on his knees and his hands in a knot. She was fine, he said to the floor. She was fine. I nodded because sometimes nodding is a bridge. In my lap the purse was a small heavy animal. I slid the zipper open an inch and brushed my fingers over the note. The paper had softened where my palm had sweated against it. The ink had feathered slightly, as if the words themselves were breathing hard. Don't drink that, your life is in danger. The sentence replayed. So did my motion in the restaurant, practiced now in memory. Left hand, right hand, 2 glasses trading places like polite strangers. I saw Marissa's face when the first wrongness touched her confusion, then something like comprehension. I heard my own voice lying to a paramedic because truth in that moment was a weapon without a target. If I told Evan now, what would my son hear? I didn't tell you, I acted alone. Your wife is behind those doors because I chose myself. A nurse offered water in paper cones. We took some to have something to hold. We did not drink. Time blurred. It does that in hospital. Minutes swagger and lie. The clock hands move like men pushing refrigerators. A doctor finally approached, young beard, tired eyes, a badge that said Dr. Patel. He crouched so he wasn't delivering news from above. "You're Evan." "Yes." Evan's voice broke on the single syllable. "Your wife is stable," Dr. Patel said, and instantly both of us learned how much air we'd been denying ourselves. "She's drowsy, a little disoriented. We're monitoring her heart and breathing." "What happened?" Evan asked. He was already nodding like he would absorb any answer if it meant belonging to a plan. "We don't know yet," the doctor said carefully, "but her labs show toxin exposure. It doesn't look like foodborne illness. We need to run a more specific panel to identify the substance." "Toxin?" Evan repeated, the word a stranger in his mouth. "Like poison?" Dr. Patel didn't flinch at the word. "There are many possibilities. Sometimes supplements are contaminated. Sometimes medications interact. Sometimes there's deliberate exposure. We don't jump to conclusions. We follow the numbers." The deliberate exposure laid its cold hand at the base of my neck. I felt the room tip a degree and right itself. "Can we see her?" Evan asked. "In a few minutes. We're getting her settled in observation." Dr. Patel's gaze moved to me. "Were you both with her when this started?" "Yes," I said, my voice behaved. "At a restaurant, she had salad and a few sips of wine." "Did she mention new medications or supplements?" he asked. Evan shook his head, then paused. "She takes herbal stuff for sleep, for focus. She buys things online sometimes." He looked at me like I might confirm her habits. I didn't. "I don't live in their house." Dr. Patel nodded. "Bring us any bottles you have at home. Labels help." He stood. "I'll have a nurse come get you soon." He left us with a silence that tasted like metal. Evan turned to me, eyes fierce and wet. "This doesn't make sense," he whispered. "Who would do this? Why would this happen?" I opened my mouth and closed it again. I could see it, my words landing like stones. The story rearranging itself so that his mother became the axis of his wife's pain. I pictured his face when I said I switched the glasses. Would he hear survival or betrayal? Across the room, a child in dinosaur pajamas snored against his mother's shoulder. The TV talked about a storm 2 states away. A volunteer restocked magazines no one read. "I'm going to bring her water when they let us in," Evan said suddenly, standing like a man who needed a task or he would come apart. "She always forgets to drink." "That's kind," I said. "I have learned that kindness is a sentence that keeps men standing." He scrubbed his face with both hands. "Mom, they kept asking the officer, the nurse, asking if anyone came near the table, if anything was weird. It's like they are looking for someone to blame." He swallowed. "Marissa is a good person." I stared at my own reflection in the dark window until I looked like someone I didn't recognize. "I know," I said softly, "because sometimes the only way through is to step on stones that might not hold." He sank back into the chair, fingers steepled at his lips. "You didn't notice anything, did you?" he asked, gentle, like he was afraid to push me into a memory that would hurt. A girl's hand sliding a note under my palm, a glass becoming another glass. A heartbeat choosing to keep going. "No," I said, and the lie was a seed that sprouted roots instantly. "Just dinner." He nodded, relieved and wrecked at once. A nurse called Evan's name from the doorway. He stood so fast the chair legs squealed. "Come on," he said, already moving. "You'll come right behind you." We followed the nurse through a corridor that smelled like bleach and lemons. Machines murmured on both sides, patient rooms like little ships with their own weather. She stopped at an open door and stepped aside. Marissa lay on the bed with a blanket up to her ribs. The mask was gone, electrodes freckled her collarbone. Her eyes were open but unfocused, like a person listening to a faraway radio. "Hey babe," Evan said. And all the bravery he'd been borrowing finally arrived in his voice. He took her hand. "I'm here, you scared me." She turned her head toward him by slow degrees. "I'm tired," she whispered. "It's okay." He smiled, tears gathering. "Rest." Her gaze slid to me just for a second, then away. I could not read what lived in that second. Blame, confusion, calculation, blank space where a feeling would be later. I stood at the foot of the bed and arranged my face into gentle. "You're safe," I said as much to myself as to her. The nurse gave us 5 minutes that felt both too long and not enough, then ushered us back to the hall. "We'll update you when the next labs come in," she said, and was gone. In the hallway, Evan leaned against the wall and let out a ragged breath. "She's okay," he said, trying the words on for fit. "She's okay." I nodded. I looked down at my purse. The note waited like a living thing. The waitress's eyes flashed in memory, urgent, certain. Somewhere in this city, a girl had watched my table and chosen to act. Somewhere in this hospital, numbers would name what moved through Marissa's blood. Somewhere in my son's chest, trust kept beating because I hadn't yet asked it to do anything else. I pressed my hand flat against the leather, feeling the whisper of paper under it, and made 2 promises that pulled in opposite directions. "To my son, I will not betray you. To the truth, I will find you." Between those vows, I walked back toward the waiting room with my heart carrying more than blood. Hospitals have a way of stretching time until it no longer resembles hours or minutes. By the time the officers arrived, I had already worn a groove into the arm of the waiting room chair, my thumb circling the same spot of plastic over and over. 2 detectives introduced themselves, one younger, brisk, with close-cropped hair, and the other older, lines carved deep into his face as though every case had left a mark. They didn't sit right away, they hovered, weighing us the way people do when they aren't sure if they are about to offer comfort or confrontation. "Mrs. Hartwell," the older one said, his tone polite but carrying weight. "We understand you were present when your daughter-in-law collapsed." "Yes," my voice surprised me with how steady it sounded. Evan jumped in before they could ask another question. "She didn't collapse, she had some sort of reaction, maybe food poisoning. She's health conscious. But she might have eaten something earlier." His words came quick, almost defensive. "There's no reason to think anything suspicious happened." The younger detective raised a brow but kept writing in his notebook. "We'll need to go over what each of you ate and drank tonight. It's just routine." Evan nodded eagerly, listing off our orders: gnocchi, salad, eggplant parmesan, wine. He was meticulous, as though details could protect Marissa from suspicion. When he mentioned them, my stomach clenched. The detective turned to me. "Did you notice anything unusual before she became ill? Anyone approach the table? Any odd behavior?" I felt my throat tighten. My hand itched to reach into my purse for the note still hidden there. "Don't drink that, your life is in danger." But Evan's profile was taut with worry, his jaw clenched, his eyes flashing with loyalty. If I told them now in front of him, what would it do? Would he look at me as though I were accusing his wife? Would he think I had lost my grip on reality? "No," I said quietly. "It was a normal dinner, nothing unusual." The lie hung heavy between my ribs. The detectives exchanged a look. Not disbelief, not belief either, just the careful neutrality of men who know how to wait. After a few more notes, they excused themselves, promising follow-up once the toxicology reports were clearer. When they were gone, Evan exhaled sharply, scrubbing his face with both hands. "I don't like the way they were looking at Marissa, like she'd done something wrong. She hasn't." "She's not." He cut himself off, shaking his head. "She's my wife, she's a good person." I nodded, though the word good felt fragile on my tongue. That night, as I sat in the hospital chair under the humming fluorescent lights, memories began to drift back, uninvited but insistent. I remembered the way Marissa's smile never seemed to reach her eyes. At family dinners, she would touch my hand and say things like, "You must be tired after teaching all day at your age," in a tone meant to sound helpful but edged with something sharper. I remembered her dropping off herbal teas or supplements, insisting they would help me stay sharp, but always with that sympathetic tilt of her head as if I had already started to dull. And then there was the brunch 2 months earlier. Sunlight streamed across Evan and Marissa's kitchen table, brightening the frittata steaming between us. Marissa had poured me orange juice, her tone airy as she said, "You know, Evan, sometimes families wait too long before considering care homes. By then it's harder for everyone. Planning early can be such a gift." Evan had shifted uncomfortably in his chair, muttering, "We don't need to talk about that right now." But the words had landed, planting themselves like burrs in my mind. Care homes, early planning for me. Had I laughed it off at the time, told myself she was just being practical. Now, in the silence of the hospital, those words wrapped tight around my chest. Am I imagining things? Was it just her way of trying to help? Or has she been carefully, quietly planting doubts not just in me but in Evan too? I rubbed my temple, my head heavy with questions. The memory of the napkin burned in my pocket, the ink of the note seared into my thoughts. One thing I knew with certainty, if I didn't find that waitress, the one with chestnut hair and steady eyes, these doubts would eat me alive. She had slipped me a warning, not out of chance, but out of knowledge. She had seen something, she knew something. I sat straighter, my pulse steadying with a strange new determination. I would find her. Whatever it took, I would track down the young woman who'd saved my life. And when I did, maybe, just maybe, the whispers swirling in my head would finally sharpen into truth. By morning, the hospital's fluorescent hum had burrowed into my bones. Evan slept in a chair by Marissa's bed, chin to chest, hands clasped as if he could hold time still. Marissa drifted between drowsy and dim, her voice soft, her eyes sliding past me like I was a window. I stayed until a nurse with kind eyebrows told me gently to go home, shower, and eat something that wasn't from a vending machine. I drove aimlessly at first, Raleigh soft in the pale light, dog walkers, joggers, a delivery truck beeping in reverse behind a bakery. The city pretended it didn't know about my secret. But the note in my purse, creased and warm from my palm, reminded me exactly what I'd decided last night in the vestibule. Find the waitress. La Bellora didn't open until 11, but the side door was propped with a crate when I pulled into the alley. A delivery guy shouldered a box of tomatoes past me. Inside, the dining room looked smaller without its evening glow, chairs upside down on tables, lemon and bleach in the air. A busboy whistling under his breath as he polished the bar. The manager from last night, dark hair, deep eye bags, the posture of a man who'd apologized to everyone in a 3-block radius, looked up when I approached. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, surprise flickering. "How is your stable?" I replied. "Thank you for calling the ambulance so fast." He nodded, relief softening his mouth. We were all very concerned. "I need to ask you for something," I said. And my teacher voice stepped forward, polite, firm, unashamed of necessity. "One of your servers slipped me a note, young, chestnut hair and a messy bun. She warned me not to drink. If she hadn't," I let the sentence trail where gratitude and fear share a border. "I need to talk to her." His eyes flicked toward the kitchen, then back. "You mean Naomi Brooks?" His wariness sharpened. "Is she in trouble?" "She saved my life," I said simply. "I think she saw something, I just need to understand." He hesitated, manager brain balancing privacy against harm. Something in my face must have done the pleading for me. "She's a nursing student," he said at last. "Wake tech nights mostly, double shifts here when she can. She lives off Glenwood near the laundromat." He scanned the schedule tacked to a corkboard. "She's on at 5 today, but if it can't wait. She sometimes studies at Bright Cup, the coffee place on Boylan, mornings." I thanked him so many times he smiled like a man unaccustomed to being on the receiving end of thanks. Then I walked back into the late morning, my heart thudding in my throat, and drove to Bright Cup. It's the kind of place with leafed-out ficus plants and lopsided art for sale. The bell chimed as I entered. A barista with a nose ring looked up, bored, wordlessly pointed to the register. I scanned the tables. There she was, shoulders hunched, hair back in the same merciless elastic, a highlighter uncapped beside a stack of textbooks, pathophysiology, pharmacology, clinical skills. She wore the haunted look of someone who spends her energy exactly twice a day, once at work, once in worry. I ordered a drip coffee I didn't want, the way you do when you're about to ask a stranger for a kindness. Then I walked to her table and cleared my throat. "Naomi?" I asked. Her head snapped up. The wary, ready-to-run look flashed first, then recognition softened it. "You're the lady from La Belle." "Selena," I said, "Janice Hartwell." She closed her textbook slowly. "Is she okay, the woman who—" "She's stable," I said, and watched relief loosen her shoulders. "I think you kept me alive last night." Naomi's mouth tightened like praise hurt a pulled muscle. "I didn't do anything fancy," she said. "I saw something I couldn't unsee." I pulled out the chair across from her. "Can I sit?" She nodded, then glanced at the cafe door as if making sure no one had followed me. "It told me something about her life that she did." "I owe you," I said, "and I need to ask what you saw." Her fingers traced the rim of her cup. When she spoke, she chose her words like a person laying tiles, careful, true. "I was running food," she said. "Your son stood to make a toast. He poured, he lifted his glass, everyone looked at him. Your daughter-in-law, Marissa, right, had her hand on the stem of your glass. She tilted it just a touch." "And did this move?" Naomi mimed, thumb and forefinger loosening from an invisible capsule over an invisible goblet. "It was small. If I hadn't been watching her, I would have missed it." I swallowed. The room pressed quiet around her description. "You're certain?" "I'm trained to see hands," she said, a little defensively, as if daring me to doubt her. "I wait tables, and I'm in nursing. I watch hands because they tell me what mouths won't." She never looked at the glass when she did it. She looked at you. The coffee turned to ash in my mouth. "Why me?" Naomi's eyes slid to the textbook titled Pharmacology, then back. "Because people who do that sort of thing like to make their work tidy." "People who do," I began, then stopped. "You mean this has happened to you before?" Naomi's jaw worked. She flipped her highlighter closed, then opened it again, an anxious metronome. "My grandfather," she said, "Harold Brooks, last year." The name trembled and steadied. "He was 79, still drove, still grew tomatoes, still cheated at dominoes. Then he fell and sprained his wrist at the grocery store. They assigned him a home caregiver for a few weeks. She was nice, attentive, said she wanted to help. I didn't breathe. He started getting tired," she went on. "Forgetful, we thought, okay, he's older, a fall can shake things. The caregiver told us we were in denial, said she saw the signs all the time, she had resources, she could help us transition with dignity." The phrase came out in a perfect imitation, flat, robotic, like a brochure learned by heart. "She told us he needed more support than we could give." Naomi stared at the table for a beat. "She started bringing him tea, supplements, vitamins," she said. "He got worse. We put him in a facility she recommended because she said she had an in there. He died 6 months later, cardiac complications." Her mouth hardened. "He didn't have a heart condition." "I'm so sorry," I said, and meant all the syllables. She nodded once in acknowledgement, eyes wet and stubborn. I started digging after the funeral. The caregiver used different names, sometimes her maiden name, sometimes a married name. Marissa is a common enough first name. Naomi's gaze met mine, but I recognized her when she walked into La Belle. A haircut can't change your eyes. She was your daughter-in-law. A cold wind moved through me that had nothing to do with the cafe's AC. I pictured Marissa's hand steadying a napkin with one finger. I pictured the casualness I'd mistaken for elegance, the helpfulness that had felt like tiny paper cuts. "You warned me because you saw her hand," I said. "I warned you because I saw my grandfather," she said. "Because I've been waiting for a chance to stop someone I couldn't stop in time before." We sat with that, our dead, our near dead, our sudden kinship, while the espresso machine hissed and a toddler banged a spoon against a table like a judge who hasn't learned mercy. "What did you tell the police after last night?" I asked. Her face guarded itself again. "Nothing yet," she lifted a shoulder. "Cops don't love waitresses who think they saw something. I need to be careful. I can't lose this job, and I don't have proof that holds up by itself." I thought of Evan's face when he'd said, "She's my wife, she's a good person." I thought of the doctor choosing words like he was defusing a bomb. I thought of the detectives writing without looking up, waiting for us to hand them a story. "What if there were more than your word?" I said slowly. "What if there were videos at the restaurant, staff who noticed behavior, her search history, her past clients, the teacher in me, the widow in me, the mother in me lined up like witnesses? What if we trace every place she's worked and cross-check the deaths that sound like your grandfather's?" The words scared me as I said them, like I was inviting a storm by naming it. Naomi's chin lifted a fraction. "Then maybe someone believes us." A beat passed. She studied me the way clinicians do vitals first, then the story. "You switched the glasses," she said. Not asking, I closed my fingers around the paper cup. "Yes, you saved yourself," she said. "That's not a sin." "It feels like one," I answered, quiet enough that only the two of us could hear it. Naomi's expression softened at the edges. "It was meant for you," she said. "That doesn't make this easier, but it makes it true." We fell into a silence that wasn't empty. It was full of what we might do next. I didn't realize I was crying until one tear tapped the cardboard sleeve around my coffee, a dark dot that bloomed like a secret. Naomi slid a napkin across the table, clean, unmarked. "I'm sorry," she said, and somehow she was apologizing for the world. I laughed once, a brittle sound that still felt like release. "You're 20 and you saved me," I said. "I'm 59 and I'm just learning how to ask for help." She smiled then, small, real, suddenly very young. 21, she corrected. "And I didn't do it alone, you switched the glasses." We traded facts the way soldiers trade supplies, quietly, efficiently. Marissa's shifts, her habits, the supplements she'd mentioned to Evan. Naomi's timeline with her grandfather, the names she'd found on documents, the facility that had welcomed him and the caregiver who'd ushered him in like a mother superior. The manager's first name, Marco. The staff Naomi trusted, a dishwasher who saw everything, a bartender with a memory like a trap. When we paused, our coffees were cold and we had the bones of a plan. "I'll talk to the detectives," I said, "but I want to bring them more than grief and guesses. I want to bring them you." Naomi's eyes widened, as in talk on record. "As in witness," I said. "You saw what you saw, and you're not alone this time." She chewed her lip, thinking of rent, tuition, schedules. "My nursing instructor says courage without a plan is just a headline," she murmured. Then she nodded, quick and final. "Okay, I'll help you, however I can." She glanced toward the door as if danger might be taking a coffee to go. "But you should be careful. If she's what I think she is, she doesn't like losing." "I've already lost enough," I said. "I'd rather not lose my life." We exchanged numbers. I saved her as Naomi Labellora and she saved me as Selena Birthday. The names made me wince and smile at the same time. As we stood, she reached for her backpack and paused. "One more thing," she said. "When I followed the caregiver after my grandfather died, I found two last names. One was Marissa Dwyer, the other was Marissa Vale." She lifted her gaze to mine. "Your daughter-in-law is Marissa Hartwell now." But last night when the hostess said Hartwell party of 3, she flinched like the name didn't fit yet. I filed the names in the drawer where I keep necessary pain. "Thank you," I said. We walked out into late morning together. The day had become itself blue, deceptively ordinary. A bus sighed to a stop. A man walked a terrier whose nails clicked on the sidewalk like a metronome. At the curb, Naomi adjusted her strap and looked at me steady. "We'll do this right," she said. "No rush, evidence first, then cops." "Agreed," I said. My voice surprised me. It sounded like the woman I had hoped to be when I was still married and thought the world made sense, capable, unafraid of hard things, allergic to lies. She started toward Glenwood, then turned back. "Selena, yes, you weren't crazy," she said. "You were careful, there's a difference." I nodded, the truth of it rising like warmth. "And you weren't just brave," I told her. "You were kind, there's a difference." We went our separate ways under the same sky, two women at opposite ends of a life, tethered by a note and a night that refused to be ordinary. In my purse, the warning rested beside a fresh napkin. A clean and blank space finally to write what happens next. And what happens next is this: Naomi and I will uncover the truth, even if it's dangerous, even if it shakes the bones of the family I thought I knew. I drove back to the hospital to sit with my son and my secret, but I wasn't alone anymore. When I returned to the hospital that afternoon, Evan was standing at the window of the observation room, his hands in his pockets, shoulders stiff, staring down at the parking lot like the answer to everything might be spelled in the asphalt. Marissa lay in the bed behind him, pale but awake, flipping absently through the channels on the mounted television. "Mom," he said without turning when he heard me approach. His voice carried that thin line between exhaustion and anger. I set my purse down and touched his arm gently. "How is she?" He finally looked at me. His face was worn, unshaven, his eyes ringed with red. "Better, weak, but better. The doctors still don't know what's in her system. They're talking to toxicologists. They think maybe a contaminated supplement." I nodded, though my throat felt dry. "Evan, can we talk, just the two of us?" He glanced back at Marissa, who was watching us with that careful, measured expression she always wore when she wasn't the center of attention. Then he followed me down the hall, into a waiting room with beige chairs and a vending machine that hummed too loudly. I didn't want to pounce. I wanted to choose my words carefully, like laying down cards one at a time. "Sweetheart," I began, "have you noticed anything unusual about Marissa lately? The way she talks to me, the things she suggests." He frowned immediately, defensive. "Unusual how? She takes care of you. She's the only one who worries about you when I'm not around. She checks in. She brings you things. She's good to you." Good, there it was again, that fragile word. "I don't mean she isn't polite," I said softly. "But sometimes the way she frames things. She's mentioned my memory before, hasn't she?" His eyes flickered. He tried to mask it, but I've known him too long. "Mom," he sighed, dragging a hand through his hair. "Yes. She said some things." My heart tightened. "What things?" "That you've been forgetful, that you repeat yourself sometime, that you misplace your keys more than you used to." He stopped, wincing at the look on my face. "She said she thought maybe it could be early signs of dementia, that I should be paying closer attention." I felt the world tilt, not because of the accusation. I knew my own mind, sharp and steady if sometimes tired, but because my son had listened. "Evan," I whispered, "and you believed her?" "I didn't want to." His voice cracked louder than he meant, then dropped again. "But it made sense. Dad, you know what happened to him, how young he was when it started. I've always been terrified I'd see it again." I closed my eyes. My late husband's decline had been a slow, merciless unraveling, and Evan had carried that shadow since his 20s. Of course Marissa would know that. Of course she'd use it. "She told me," Evan went on, "that we needed to prepare, that we shouldn't wait until it was too late." He looked at me then, guilt swimming behind his defenses. "She even said maybe we should start looking into care homes, just in case." The words landed like ice water down my back. I saw it in my memory, the brunch, the way she'd said it so casually while handing me orange juice, her eyes fixed on Evan more than me. Proactive planning is a gift. I took a step back, gripping the chair behind me. "Evan, I am not losing my mind. I am not confused. I am not ready for a care home." He flinched at my tone. I know you're still strong, but she made it sound so convincing. "And then last month you signed those papers she brought." I froze. "Papers?" He nodded quickly, almost desperately. "You don't remember?" She said they were routine documents to get things in order, a precaution. She said you wanted to make sure your finances and medical directives were clear. "You signed in front of us." My chest constricted. Memory rushed back, me sitting at the dining table with a headache, a stack of papers before me, Marissa's voice smoothing everything over. "Just standard forms, Selena. Everyone should have them. It'll give Evan peace of mind." I remembered holding the pen, my hand heavy, my head foggy, trusting her when she said, "Sign here and here." And now, standing in that waiting room, the weight of that pen burned like fire in my fingers. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Evan, do you know what those documents were? Did you read them?" His gaze faltered. I skimmed them: power of attorney, medical consent, stuff people normally have. She said you wanted me to handle things if something happened. I sank into the chair, my body trembling. Power of attorney, medical consent. My signature given when I'd been too tired, too trusting, too ready to believe that someone in my family wanted to protect me. Betrayal layered over guilt, pressing me into the seat. Evan knelt in front of me, his hands gripping mine. "Mom, please don't look at me like that. I thought it was the right thing." I thought she was helping us. I didn't mean. I pulled my hands away gently, unable to bear the warmth of them. "Not now." "You believed her," I said, my voice cracked on the words. "You believed her lies about me." He opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. I stood before he could try again. "I need some air." That night, back in my quiet house, the silence weighed heavier than the hospital's machines. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the framed photo of Evan as a boy, holding a sparkler on the 4th of July, joy blazing across his face. I pressed my forehead against the cool wood of the table and let the tears come. For the first time since this nightmare began, I cried, not because someone wanted me dead, but because the person I trusted most in this world might never believe I was telling the truth. The note lay in my lap, its ink fading slightly where my tears touched it. I whispered into the darkness, my voice breaking. "If you won't believe me, then I'll have to prove it." Naomi Brooks had the kind of determination you could feel across a table. When she leaned in, her brown eyes steady, voice low, I knew I'd found someone who carried her own wounds but refused to let them fester into silence. We met at a coffee shop near campus. She had textbooks stacked beside her, highlighter marks bleeding across the pages. But she pushed them aside the moment I sat down. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said, "I didn't slip you that note by mistake. I saw what I saw." Her words steadied me, though my hands still shook around my cup. "Tell me," I whispered. "I was bussing tables," Naomi said. "Your son raised his glass. When you looked at him," Marissa reached into her purse, quick as a blink. "She tilted something into your wine. I thought maybe I imagined it. But then I saw her stir with her finger. That's when I knew." The truth settled on my shoulders like a heavy cloak. I wanted to deny it, to say Naomi had misunderstood. But deep inside, I already knew she hadn't. "I had to warn you," Naomi added, her voice trembling now, "because I've seen this before. My grandfather, he died under circumstances no one could explain. And the caregiver who was with him then, she was using a different last name, but I swear to God, it was her, it was Marissa." My breath caught. Naomi pulled out a folder from her backpack, papers she had clearly been collecting for months. "I've been digging. I didn't have proof before, just gut instincts. But the patterns, they're there. She's worked at 3 different nursing facilities in the last 10 years. At each one there were sudden deaths, mostly older men and women, all without prior heart conditions, all labeled as natural causes." I flipped through the photocopied obituaries and news clippings, the faces of strangers staring up at me, smiling grandparents, warm, ordinary people, gone too soon. "She knows the system," Naomi said bitterly. "She befriends families, convinces them their loved ones are declining faster than they are. Then she pushes for power of attorney, financial access. And within months, she snapped her fingers. Gone, the air in the cafe seemed too thin. My mind drifted back through my own recent months, the unexplained dizziness, the fatigue I had chalked up to age, the confusion that scared me enough to stay silent. The cups of tea Marissa had so thoughtfully brewed for me, the supplements she pressed into my hand, insisting they'd help. They weren't symptoms of age, they were signs of a slow, deliberate poisoning. I set the folder down, my heart pounding. "Do you realize what this means?" I said, my voice low but steady. Naomi leaned back, arms crossed. "It means you and I aren't crazy. It means she's been playing this game for a long time and too many people have already paid the price." I stared at my reflection in the coffee's dark surface, seeing not the aging widow I'd been made to feel like, but a woman staring into the eyes of something monstrous. And yet, alongside the horror came clarity. How many times had I mistaken her condescension for kindness? How many times had I excused her remarks as awkward rather than malicious? How many times had I ignored my own instincts because I didn't want to be the paranoid mother-in-law? Kindness, I realized, can be the most effective disguise for cruelty. And care, the kind that comes wrapped in soft words and gentle hands, can be a weapon honed sharper than a blade. I closed the folder and looked at Naomi. I can't let her keep doing this. I can't let her win. Her face softened. I'll help you, Mrs. Hartwell, but it's dangerous if she realizes you're onto her. She already tried to kill me, I said, cutting her off. The danger's here whether I face it or not. Naomi held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded. Then we face it together. That night, I sat in my quiet house, the folder open on my kitchen table, obituaries, medical records, employment histories, proof woven into a trail of shadows that led straight to Marissa's hands. I thought of Evan, of the boy who once clung to me at the edge of the pool, terrified of sinking, and how I had held him up, whispering, "You're safe, I won't let you go." Now it was me drowning, and I wondered if he would hold me, or if he would keep clinging to the woman who was pulling me under. I folded the note Naomi had given me, the napkin with its fading ink, and slid it into the folder. My hand lingered there, shaking. Then I whispered into the silence of my kitchen, "It's time. Tomorrow I would take this evidence to the police." And for the first time since that night at the restaurant, I felt a spark of something I thought I'd lost. Not fear, not guilt. Courage. The precinct smelled of old coffee and disinfectant. I sat in a chair that squeaked every time I shifted, clutching the folder Naomi had helped me assemble. My palms were slick against the manila paper, but I refused to let go. Detective Harper Quinn entered the room with the deliberate calm of a man who had seen too much and trusted too little. He was tall, mid-40s, hair thinning at the crown, with eyes that missed nothing. He placed a recorder on the table, clicked it on, and leaned back in his chair. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, his voice even, "you've requested this meeting to present information about your daughter-in-law. Before we begin, I want to remind you making false allegations is serious. Are you sure you want to proceed?" I looked him straight in the eye. "Detective, I am sure. Marissa has been trying to kill me, and I can prove it." His expression didn't change, but he gestured for me to continue. My hands shook as I opened the folder and slid forward the napkin, Naomi's photocopied records, the obituaries, the timelines. For 20 minutes I spoke. About the night of the birthday dinner, the dizziness, the fatigue, the tea and supplements, the papers I'd signed under foggy confusion. Naomi sat beside me, her presence like a steady anchor. When I faltered, she filled in the gaps, explaining how she had seen Marissa slip something into my glass, how her own grandfather had died under eerily similar circumstances. When I finished, Detective Quinn sat in silence for a long moment, flipping through the pages. He tapped his pen on the table. "It's a compelling story," he finally said. "But you must understand, Mrs. Hartwell, families often misinterpret illness as malice. Older relatives develop symptoms, people get scared, and sometimes caregivers become scapegoats." I stiffened. "Are you saying I imagined all of this?" He held up a hand. "I'm saying I need more than your word and your suspicion. Patterns are interesting, but they are not proof. If I take this to the DA without solid evidence, it dies in paperwork." Before I could respond, the door burst open. Evan stormed in. His face flushed, his jaw tight. "Mom, what the hell are you doing?" "Evan," he turned on Detective Quinn, "don't listen to her. My wife is sick, she almost died, and now my mother is accusing her of murder. It's insane." My chest ached as though his words were stones. "Evan, please just listen." "No," his voice cracked, sharp enough to sting. "I've listened long enough. Ever since Dad died, I've tried to hold us together. And now you're turning on the one person who's been there for me." Naomi shifted beside me, ready to speak, but I squeezed her hand. "This was my battle." "Evan," I said softly, "I am not turning on you. I'm fighting for my life. Please just look at the evidence." He shook his head, eyes glistening with betrayal. "You're destroying our family. Do you even hear yourself? You sound paranoid, delusional." The words cut deep. reopening wounds I thought had already bled dry. Detective Quinn finally intervened. "Mr. Hartwell, sit down. Your mother has brought us material we can't just ignore." Evan glared at him, then back at me, but he didn't sit. His silence screamed louder than his anger. I reached into my bag and pulled out a leather-bound notebook, worn soft from years of use. I slid it across the table toward Quinn. "This is my journal. I started keeping track months ago. When I first noticed things were wrong. Dizzy spells, sudden fatigue, memory lapses. Dates, times, what I ate, who was with me, every symptom, it's all in there." Quinn flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing as he scanned the neat lines of handwriting. "These entries are consistent. They match the timeline you've described. And the correlation with your daughter-in-law's visits, it's striking." Evan muttered under his breath, "Or maybe Mom just wrote it that way to make it fit." But Quinn's eyes sharpened. "No, this is detailed, too detailed to fabricate easily. Mrs. Hartwell, this strengthens your account significantly." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of validation. Someone was finally listening. Quinn closed the journal, his tone shifting. "I'll open a formal inquiry. We'll need to subpoena medical and pharmacy records, cross-check employment histories." He leaned forward. "If Marissa has been doing what you say, it will leave a trail." Evan groaned, running his hands through his hair. "This is insane. You're all wasting your time." He turned to me, his voice breaking now. "Mom, how could you? After everything Marissa's done for you, how could you try to ruin her?" Tears burned in my eyes, but I forced myself to meet his gaze. "Because she tried to ruin me first." The room fell into silence. Just then Quinn's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his face hardening as he answered. A brief exchange, then he hung up. He looked at us, his expression grim. "We've just received confirmation from the state database. Prescriptions for digoxin and amiodarone, strong cardiac drugs, were filled under Marissa Hartwell's name in the past 6 months. But the patient listed," he paused, eyes locking on mine, "was you, Mrs. Hartwell." The floor seemed to vanish beneath me. I had never been prescribed those drugs in my life. The cliff edge yawned open, and I realized we were about to tumble into something darker than I ever imagined. WakeMed looked different when you walked in on purpose instead of being carried by fear. The floors still gleamed, the air still smelled faintly of lemons and disinfectant, the hum of machines still threaded the halls. But this time I wasn't just a mother or a patient's relative or a woman holding her breath. I was a witness walking toward a truth that might break my family in two. Detective Harper Quinn met me near the elevator bay with a clipboard tucked under his arm and a second officer I hadn't seen before, Sergeant Tilda Mays, compact, steady eyes like dark marbles that had seen a lot and still didn't judge. Quinn's tie was crooked as if he dressed while moving. He nodded once, brisk but not unkind. "You're sure you want to do this, Mrs. Hartwell?" he asked. "No," I said honestly. "But I'm done being afraid of my own life." He studied me a second, then gestured toward the corridor. "We'll be in the room, recorder rolling, no surprises, you talk," she responds. "If we intervene, it's for safety, not drama." Drama, the word made something in me laugh without sound. I followed them to observation 14, the door already cracked. Evan stood just inside, his arms folded and his jaw tight. He'd shaved. It didn't make him look less tired. He didn't meet my eyes. A nurse clipped something to a monitor and slipped out, the door's soft sigh strangling the last easy air. Marissa lay propped against pillows, hair brushed and glossy hospital gown hidden beneath a slate blue cardigan I recognized from her favorite brand. The line in her hand had been capped. If it weren't for the electrodes at her collarbone, you could have mistaken this for a photo shoot titled "Recovering Chic." "Selena," she breathed, soft as a lullaby. She pressed her palm to her sternum. "Oh my God, I'm so relieved. I was begging them to let me see you." Quinn took a position near the wall, Sergeant Mays beside him, unobtrusive but present. Evan hovered near the end of the bed, torn between wife and mother, a familiar geography that now felt like a fault line. I wanted to check on you, I said. I heard how even my voice sounded and marveled at it like a bridge in a storm that holds. She put on a small, wounded smile, her eyes filmed with manufactured shine. This has all been a nightmare. The police asking questions, the doctors implying things, the manager at La Bellora acting like I brought this on myself. Her gaze slid to Quinn, then back. I don't understand why anyone thinks I would hurt you. I love you. She landed the word with a careful tremor. I held her stare. Then this will be simple, I said. We just need the truth. She blinked, recalibrating. Of course, anything. She reached for the plastic water cup and took a tiny sip like an actress rehearsing vulnerability. Quinn cleared his throat without apology. Mrs. Hartwell, we're recording, you consent. She drew back a touch, surprised. You're recording now, while I'm still recovering. That's correct, Quinn said. We'll keep this efficient. She gave a tiny shrug, magnanimous, and turned to me with open palms. Ask me anything, Selina. I took a breath that tasted like disinfectant and memory. At La Bellora during the toast, did you touch my wine? The faintest flinch, a blink too slow, a smile too quick. Everyone touched glasses. It was a toast. Not the glass, I said, my wine. I was holding my own, she said lightly. Maybe the glasses got jostled, you know how crowded it was. I kept my eyes where hers couldn't escape. A server saw you drop something into my drink. Then she's mistaken, Marissa said. The denial immediate, practiced, or lying. People lie for all kinds of reasons. Maybe she wants attention. Maybe she hates me because I sent back cold risotto once. A brittle laugh. Sergeant May's pen clicked once. You're on camera, Quinn said evenly. The restaurant has decent coverage. We're pulling the footage, so let's not spend time on theories you might regret. Marissa's smile flashed, vanished. What is this? She looked at Evan, seeking purchase. Your mother is sick and you're interrogating me like some. Marissa, Evan said, voice low, warning and apology braided. He didn't look at me, but he didn't move to her side either. The middle ground shook. I reached into my tote and placed my journal on the tray table. I wrote down months of symptoms. I said, every time I felt dizzy after a visit, every cup of tea you brought, every afternoon I fell asleep sitting up after you said, this will help you rest. Her lips parted. For 1 second I saw the mask slip just enough to show what lived beneath, annoyance at being inconvenienced. Selina, you're making patterns out of coincidence. You're scared of aging. A lot of women are. I'm scared of dying for someone else's plan, I said, a muscle feathered in her cheek. You think so little of me, she murmured, eyes glossy again. She turned her head on the pillow to include Evan in the store. Your mother has never liked me from the beginning, you know that. Stop it, Evan said quietly. Just answer. Her gaze flicked to the recorder, then toward the small mirror bolted to the wall. She calibrated again, finding the angle that cast her best, reluctant martyr. I made mistakes, she said. I've been stressed. I said things about your memory I shouldn't have, Selina. I projected. I was worried about my unit at work. I see decline every day. Maybe I started seeing it everywhere. You told Evan to look at care homes, I said. You put papers in front of me when I was foggy and called them routine. You tried to make my son practice grieving while I was still alive. Her mouth thinned. I suggested we prepare. That's not a crime. Quinn stepped forward, opening a file folder with the kind of finality that rearranges air. Preparing is not a crime, he agreed, but altering legal documents is. He withdrew copies and slid them onto the rolling table. These are the forms your mother-in-law signed last month. We've had them examined. Sections were replaced. Language was modified to expand the scope of durable power of attorney and transfer on death designations. The formatting inconsistencies and metadata suggest a home edit, not a lawyer's. Marissa's jaw lifted. Anyone could have tampered with those after the fact. We compared them to the versions on her attorney's server. Quinn said, your edits predate the signatures and the docx revision history. Well, let's say your laptop keeps better secrets than you think. He let that sit. We also have pharmacy records indicating digoxin and amiodarone were filled under your name for Janice Hartwell as patient. She has no prescriptions for either. Would you like to explain?" Her eyes flashed hot then cold. She pivoted to outrage. "This is harassment. I picked up meds for a client from work. They must have mixed up the names." "Those facilities use closed-loop dispensing," Sergeant Mays said the first time her voice entered the room. It was low. "Factual, a blade wrapped in felt. No retail pharmacy pickups for controlled meds, not in the last 2 years." Something hard and bright slid into Marissa's gaze. The performance faltered. Evan's breath made a sound. He looked between us as if a magician had just revealed the trapdoor he'd refused to believe existed. "Marissa." She recovered speed, a figure skater over thin ice. "They're making mistakes, Evan. They always do. You know how systems are. One typo becomes a story." "Then why," Quinn asked, "did you also purchase empty gelatin capsules from an online retailer 3 times in the last quarter, delivered to your home, signed for by you? Why the mortar and pestle shipped a week before your mother-in-law's birthday? Why the supplement bottles in your pantry with micro traces of cardiac glycosides on the threads?" Silence pressed the room flat. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor chirped as if to remind us bodies keep time even while stories break. Marissa stared at him, the composure on her face now like a painting someone had left in the rain. "I'm being framed," she said, and the words were slightly wrong. "Like a dress borrowed from a friend with different shoulders. Someone is trying to destroy me, maybe that waitress, maybe your mother." She turned to me then, and the sweetness drained out of her smile until what remained was something clinical. "You never wanted me in this family." I let the accusation pass through me. "I wanted my son safe," I said. "I still do." She leaned forward, the Roman IV tape pulling at her skin. The pleasant voice vanished. "Selena, you would have been better off." She stopped herself, air snapping shut between us. It was only half a sentence, but the half that existed was a confession's outline. Evan flinched. "Better off what?" He had stepped closer to the bed without knowing it. His hand hovered above the rail, then fell. His face had gone colorless, his mouth a flat line trying to be brave. "Finish the sentence, Marissa." She seemed to realize all at once that the room had rotated around her. The camera red dot might as well have been a bullseye. She pulled the cardigan closed at her throat. "Better off listening to me," she said, the rewrite clumsy. "You would have been better off if you'd let me handle things. I was trying to protect everyone." "By editing legal documents?" Quinn asked. "By filling prescriptions in my name?" I added. "By telling me my mother was losing her mind?" Evan's voice broke on the last word. "He didn't call me Mom. He called me my name." The grief in that small switch almost buckled me. Marissa's eyes hardened to glass. "You're all ungrateful," she said, the mask finally slipping far enough to show bone. "I held your lives together. I managed the messes. You don't know what people are capable of when they feel entitled to money, to time, to your home, to your marriage. I was preventing a collapse." SGT Mays wrote something on her pad and underlined it. Quinn didn't blink. "Here's what's going to happen," he said levelly. "We'll obtain your devices and hard drives. We'll pull the Labellora footage. We'll subpoena every facility you've worked for and cross-reference mortalities with your shifts. If the pattern is as consistent as it looks from outside, we'll see it from inside. If we're wrong, the records will clear you. If we're right." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The room could do the math. For a second, no one moved. Then something in Marissa bucked. "Get out," she snapped, not to the detectives, to me. "Get out of my room." I stepped forward until the tray table pressed against my thighs. I wanted to bring the storm down. I wanted to speak like fire. Instead, I spoke like a teacher with 30 students and one chance to reach them. Calm, precise. "You took my naps and called them symptom. You put a pen in my hand and called it love. You made me doubt my own mind," I said, heat finally breaching the levee of my calm. "But you'll never steal my soul." For a heartbeat. None of us breathed. Then Evan made a sound I'd never heard from him before, a quiet, wounded thing, half man, half boy. He put his hand to his mouth like he'd said it and was trying to take it back. He stepped away from the bed. Marissa watched him with a soldier's assessment of retreat. "Evan," she said, reaching, voice softened by muscle memory. "Don't let them turn you against me." He looked at her hand, then at me. Whatever he saw in my face must have been enough. He let his arms fall to his sides. "I think," he said, eyes wet and clear, "they didn't have to." Quinn clicked off the recorder. The tiny sound broke the spell. "We're done for today," he said. He handed me a card. "We'll be in touch soon. Mrs. Hartwell, Ms. Hartwell," he added, nodding with procedural neutrality that didn't quite hide a shifting calculus. Sergeant Mays opened the door. The hallway's ordinary noise returned, wheels, voices. A laugh from a nurse's station that still believed in jokes. I took one step, then another. At the threshold, I looked back. Marissa had turned her face to the window, jaw clenched, eyes dry. If there was a world where she cried and repented, it did not live in this room. The cardigan at her throat looked suddenly like a hand. In the hall, Evan leaned against the wall and let the weight of everything find him. I touched his sleeve, not asking for anything, not offering a script. He closed his eyes and nodded once, the smallest yes. We walked together toward the elevator, Quinn's card heavy in my palm. The promise of evidence ahead of us, like dawn you can't see yet but know is coming. Somewhere behind us, a monitor steadied to a normal rhythm, unaware of what had just shifted. I didn't feel victorious. I felt carved out and clear. The kind of clear that hurts and heals at the same time. The doors slid open. We stepped in. And for the first time since a folded napkin changed the weather of my life, I felt the floor beneath my feet as something that might hold. "Detective Quinn called 2 days later." His voice over the phone carried the kind of gravity that made you sit down without thinking. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, "it's bigger than we thought." Bigger. The word echoed in me as I drove to the precinct, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Naomi met me there, clutching a messenger bag stuffed with notebooks and files. She looked younger than her 23 years that morning, her cheeks pale, her eyes shadowed. Yet she stood straight, steady, as if bracing herself for another blow. Inside, Quinn spread photographs and reports across a conference table. There were names I didn't recognize, faces smiling from church directories or family albums. Edith Graham, 82, Martha Collins, 76, Janice Rollins, 85, women in Tennessee, Virginia, South Carolina. Each had been healthy for their age. Each had died suddenly of cardiac complications. Each had one thing in common. Marissa had been employed or volunteering at their nursing facility during the months leading up to their deaths. "Patterns undeniable," Quinn said, tapping the pages with his pen. She charmed families, whispered about memory lapses, then offered to help with paperwork. Every one of these women signed over partial or full financial authority to relatives, or in 2 cases, directly to a care consultant connected to Marissa's aliases. I stared at the faces, a pit opening in my chest. They could have been me, they almost were me. Naomi opened her notebook, her handwriting cramped but precise. "My grandfather's name should be there too," she said quietly. "He was fine mowing his lawn, joking with me about my textbooks. Then she came around, and within months he couldn't remember my name. She said it was dementia. I believed her, we all did." Her throat tightened. By the time we realized it was too late, and she was gone. Her voice cracked, and for the first time since meeting her, she let the grief spill out, the raw kind that scrapes years off your heart. I reached across the table, covering her trembling hand with mine. "Naomi, you gave me the warning she couldn't. You broke her cycle." She nodded, wiping her cheeks, but the sorrow in her eyes didn't fade. Evan had been sitting silent in the corner, his face carved in stone, but now he spoke. His voice was low, hoarse, like it had traveled miles of regret. "I should have protected you, Mom." I turned to him. His eyes were bloodshot, his shoulders hunched with shame. "All this time, I let her tell me you were confused, sick, slipping away. I believed her. I let her poison the way I saw you." His voice broke. "I failed you." I went to him, kneeling so we were eye to eye. My son, the boy who once cried when he thought he lost me at the county fair, the man who now thought he had lost me in a slower, crueler way. I cupped his face in my hands. You didn't fail me, Evan. We were both victims of her lies. His tears came then, falling fast, his chest heaving with the weight of guilt. I held him the way I had when he was little, when nightmares clawed at his sleep, rocking gently, whispering, "She used your love against you. That's not your sin, that's her crime." Naomi turned away to give us privacy, but I saw her shoulders rise and fall as she fought her own storm. Quinn cleared his throat softly. "We've got what we need. The DA signed off on a warrant this morning. We're moving forward." Hours later, I stood in the hospital corridor, my heart hammering as uniformed officers filed past me into Marissa's room. Evan was beside me, silent but resolute. Naomi lingered down the hall, arms folded, her face pale but fierce. The door swung open. Marissa emerged between two officers, handcuffed, her hospital gown hidden under a hoodie someone had provided. Her face was drained of its practiced warmth. There was no victim's smile now, no feigned tenderness. Just a cold, sharp mask. She saw me instantly. For a breath, neither of us blinked. Her lips curved, not in kindness but in promise, an unspoken vow that this wasn't over. Her eyes burned into mine, steady, unflinching, as if she were carving her hatred into my skin. I held her gaze unshaken. For the first time I felt no fear in her presence, only clarity. She passed by, chains clinking softly, swallowed by the officer's steps. Beside me, Evan let out a shaky exhale. "It's really happening," he whispered. "Yes," I said. Watching the corridor empty, my voice quiet but strong. "It's happening, and it's only the beginning." Because reckoning wasn't just about her, it was about rebuilding what she'd tried to destroy, the trust, the love, the life I refused to surrender. The courthouse smelled faintly of varnished wood and nerves. Sunlight slanted through tall windows, cutting across the faces of strangers gathered in the gallery. Reporters clustered by the back doors, their notebooks ready, their cameras hungry. When the bailiff called State of North Carolina v. Marissa Hartwell, a silence swept the room like a tide. I sat at the witness table beside Detective Quinn, my palms pressed together in my lap. The folded napkin still tucked in my purse, a relic of the night everything cracked open. Marissa entered with her attorneys, dressed in a tailored gray suit that made her look more polished than penitent. She glanced briefly toward me and Evan. Her lips curled in the faintest smile, a private signal meant to unsettle. Evan's hand tightened on mine, grounding me. Judge Wallace, silver-haired and severe, presided with a gaze that could slice marble. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this trial will determine whether the defendant committed crimes of attempted murder, forgery, and financial exploitation of vulnerable adults." His words echoed in the hushed chamber. The prosecution began with methodical precision. They laid out the sequence: the birthday dinner, the toxicology reports, the altered documents. Witnesses were called one by one: medical experts, handwriting specialists, pharmacists confirming suspicious prescriptions in Marissa's name. And then, it was my turn. When I took the stand, the oath in my mouth tasted like iron. I adjusted the microphone, my throat dry, but when I looked out at the jury, a mix of young professionals and older citizens, each carrying the weight of judgment, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt responsibility. I told them about the night of my birthday, the toast, the warmth of my son's words, the folded napkin that changed everything. I described the symptoms, the dizziness, fatigue that I had dismissed as age. I held up my journal, page after page filled with my handwriting, every episode recorded in stubborn ink. She made me question myself, I said, my voice breaking only once. She made me believe I was losing my mind, that I was becoming a burden, and when I doubted myself, I almost lost everything. Across the courtroom, Marissa sat stone still, her lawyers whispering into her ear. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. Oh, the defense cross-examined with practiced sharpness. "Mrs. Hartwell," one of the lawyers asked, "isn't it true you're nearly 60? Isn't forgetfulness common at your age? Couldn't your confusion have been natural? I met his eyes. Forgetfulness is one thing, being poisoned is another. I know the difference. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Later Naomi was called. She walked to the stand with her head high, though her hands trembled slightly as she held them to be sworn in. When she spoke about her grandfather, her voice caught, but she pushed through. My grandfather trusted her, she said, staring at Marissa. We all did. She convinced us he was sick when he wasn't. By the time we realized, she had drained his savings and left us with nothing but grief. I didn't want to believe someone could be that cruel, but I saw her again that night at La Bellora, and I couldn't stay silent. I couldn't let her do it again. Her words rang with truth, echoing the ache in my chest. The defense shifted tactics, presenting their trump card, an insanity plea. They painted Marissa as unstable, burdened by trauma from her years in healthcare, a woman who snapped under the weight of compassion fatigue. Her attorney's voice softened as he spoke. She is not evil, ladies and gentlemen. She is sick, and sickness deserves treatment, not punishment. For a moment, the jury's faces softened. Doubt flickered. That was when the prosecutor rose. He called me back for a final statement. My knees wobbled as I walked, but I steadied myself on the rail of the witness box. I want to speak not only for myself, I said, turning toward the jury, but for every elder who has been dismissed. For every mother, every grandmother who was told their confusion was just age. For every family who was convinced their loved one was fading when, in truth, someone was pushing them toward the grave. I let my eyes meet theirs one by one. She didn't just try to kill me. She tried to erase me before I was gone. And she would have kept doing it, because people like her count on silence, on disbelief, on our fear of being a burden. But I am not a burden. I am a woman with a voice, and today I am using it. The courtroom went still. Even Judge Wallace's gavel hand hesitated. When the jury retired, the hours bled together, but when they returned, the foreman's voice was steady. On the charge of attempted murder, guilty. On the charge of financial fraud, guilty. On the charge of forgery, guilty. A collective breath filled the courtroom. Evan's hand found mine again, and I felt his tears slip hot across my knuckles. Naomi closed her eyes, whispering something I couldn't hear but felt like a prayer. Marissa's face remained a mask, but her eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, flashed with fury as deputies led her away. For the first time in months, I felt the weight begin to lift. Justice had not healed everything, but it had spoken. And for once, it spoke for us. The lake looked different each morning. Sometimes silver, sometimes gold, sometimes veiled in a mist that made the water seem like it was holding secrets. I'd bought the little house on its shore 6 months after the verdict. A cottage with peeling white shutters and a garden that begged for a second chance. I hadn't realized until the first night I slept there how badly I needed walls that weren't haunted by poisoned teacups and forged documents. This place was quiet, but not lonely. The loons cried at dusk and the wind moved gently through the pines. Every time I turned the key in the door, I felt a small, steady pulse of freedom, like I'd claimed something back that Marissa had tried to steal. Evan came on Sundays. At first, he was stiff, careful, his eyes shadowed by guilt. But we'd started therapy together, sessions where we sat in a circle with a kind, sharp-eyed counselor who refused to let us hide behind silence. He admitted things that had weighed on him for months. How he doubted me, how he'd believed Marissa's lies, how part of him had wanted me to be sick because it meant he wouldn't have to face the truth about his wife. Hearing it hurt, but it was also the beginning of something new. Honesty, even when raw, was better than the silence that poison had planted between us. Now he came to the lake and helped me patch up the garden beds, his hands dirty, his laugh breaking loose more easily each week. One afternoon, he pressed a packet of marigold seeds into my hand. "Plant these," he said, a crooked smile on his face, "so you'll know I'm coming back next year." I held the little envelope like it was a vow. Naomi visited often too. She had graduated nursing school in May, her cap bobbing awkwardly as she hugged me afterward. I sat in the crowd of families, clapping until my palms stung. My chest full of pride that wasn't biological but felt every bit as real. She called me my borrowed grandmother once, laughing, but I saw the way her eyes softened when she said it. When she announced she wanted to specialize in geriatric care, I cried harder than I did on my own son's graduation day. Because of you, she told me simply. You reminded me that the elderly aren't fragile, they are fighters, survivors, and they deserve more than pity. They deserve advocates. On summer evenings, she came over with textbooks or fresh bread from the farmer's market. We sat on the porch, sipping sweet tea, talking about everything from faith to forgiveness. She filled a place in my life I hadn't known was empty until she walked into it. But healing wasn't instant. Some nights, the shadows pressed in the memory of Marissa's cold smile, the echo of her voice whispering that I was slipping away. I would wake in a sweat, convinced I'd forgotten something crucial. In those moments, I turned to my journal, not the old one filled with symptoms and doubt, but a new one, its first page inscribed with a promise. This is mine. No one else will define me. Every laugh with Evan, every seed planted in the garden, every sunrise mirrored on the lake, these were the entries I added now. Proof that survival wasn't just about living, but about reclaiming joy piece by piece. Sometimes, standing barefoot in the garden, dirt warm beneath my feet, I whispered it aloud to the wind as if the lake itself needed to hear. They tried to erase me, but I've written myself back into the world. And in the soft rustle of the leaves, in the laughter of my son fixing the trellis, in Naomi's determined footsteps on her new path, I heard the world answer back. Yes, you're here, and you are unbroken. The first time I stood in front of a microphone, my hands trembled so badly I thought I might drop my notes. The community center was packed that night, rows of folding chairs filled with families, social workers, church members, and a few curious reporters. Children fidgeted on laps, elderly couples held hands. I could see Naomi in the front row, her eyes bright, Evan sitting tall beside her. I cleared my throat, the sound echoing through the hall. My name is Janice Hartwell, I began, and I am here tonight because someone tried to take my life not with a gun or a knife, but with something quieter, crueler, with lies, with poison hidden in kindness. A hush settled over the crowd. I told them everything about the folded napkin, the wine glass, the dizzy spells, the papers I'd signed without understanding. I told them how easy it is to doubt yourself when someone insists you're slipping, how even the strongest person can be made to feel small when love is used as a weapon. But I didn't end with fear. I ended with the truth that had saved me. You are not crazy, I said, scanning the faces in front of me. If something feels wrong, trust that feeling. Protect your elders, believe them when they say something isn't right. Because dignity doesn't fade with age. It's stolen when no one is looking. When I finished, the silence broke into applause, not the polite kind, but the kind that came from somewhere deeper, grateful, urgent, necessary. I felt it move through me like a tide, washing away the last of the poison's shadow. In the weeks that followed, invitations came from churches, senior centers, libraries. I didn't say yes to all of them, but I said yes to enough. Each time I spoke, more people came forward, sons, daughters, grandchildren, even elders themselves, sharing stories they had kept hidden. They cried, they asked questions, they found each other. And slowly I realized my pain had been repurposed into something bigger: protection, awareness, change. One afternoon, after a talk at the IMCA, I came home to find a letter in my mailbox. The handwriting was shaky, the paper thin. Dear Mrs. Hartwell, it read, I heard your story last month. I thought I was imagining things when my caregiver kept giving me pills that made me weak. When she told my family, I was getting confused. After hearing you speak, I insisted on tests. Turns out my blood showed drugs I was never prescribed. My daughter has taken over and I am safe now. You saved my life without even knowing me. Thank you. I pressed the letter to my chest, tears blurring the words. That night, I sat on my porch by the lake. The sky streaked pink and gold, Naomi laughing inside with Evan over some board game I could hear but not see. I breathed in the air cool and sharp and let the peace of it settle in my bones. They tried to erase me, I whispered into the dusk, but I've written myself back into the world. I thought of the women whose faces had stared up from Quinn's files, of Naomi's grandfather, of every elder who'd been silenced. They would never get their voices back. But I could carry them forward. This was my victory, not revenge, not even justice. Life, a life I reclaimed, a life I now live freely. And as the sun slipped beneath the water's edge, I knew this was not an ending, but a beginning. Janice's story didn't end like a fairy tale. Healing is not instant, it's a journey. Some nights she still wakes in fear, but each morning by the lake she chooses life. She chooses to remind herself and others that dignity cannot be stolen. Her community is different now. Families protect their elders, Naomi works to keep others safe. And Evan is learning to rebuild trust with his mother. Janice speaks openly, not as a victim, but as a survivor who reclaimed her voice. They try to erase me, she says, but I've written myself back into the world. Healing means living even with scars. Herb, and I'll leave you with this question. If someone you loved was being manipulated, would you recognize it in time, and would you have the courage to act? A backhand index pointing right. If Janice's story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe for more life stories that matter.